and welcome to this green tea induced video in the land of Ethereum. And we've got pugs, we've got ponies, I've got body jewelry on, and nothing says Showtime quite like body jewelry. I even have an Ethereum shirt, but you can't really see it from there. That's okay. So, I mean, go figure. I have been an Ethereum fan for a while now, even though I heard about Bitcoin in about 2013, 2014. I heard about it in 2013. I did not get involved in blockchain until I finally did invest in Ethereum thereafter, because it just seemed like a much more trustworthy platform. And I've since gotten into Bitcoin too, don't get me wrong. Like, I'm a fan of blockchain technology in general. I even run a local meetup group here. But at the same time, I feel like Ethereum holds a magical special place in my heart. And even though, like, I know unicorns are kind of a thing in the Ethereum ecosystem, in my opinion, there's nothing more magical than a pug. Like, you can have all the unicorns and mermaids that you want in your universe, but until you've had a pug, you don't know real magic. So I brought one of those in, and I'm also going to try and make it fun. Bottom line is, if you want a more bland, straightforward version of what's featured in this video, go to my website. I'll have a link below for crypt keepers, and then this section, which is going to be the Ethereum timeline. But if you want a more fun version, then just kick it with me for a while and the ponies, and we're just gonna go through the history of Ethereum. And it's not a terribly long history because it's only been around, like, white paper-wise, since 2013. So that being said, let's get started with what was going on before that white paper existed. And I think this one's name is Rarity here to kind of like showcase what I mean by this. And prior to 2013, back in about 2009 and 10, when Bitcoin came out, Vitalik Buterin, aka Rarity, was frolicking around in the land of blockchain and Bitcoin, because that was all that was out there at the time, and he was just really fascinated by the protocol and what it was able to do, to where he started writing a lot of articles and co-founding Bitcoin Magazine, which is a pretty cool thing. And I thought a kind of funny side note is that back in the day, Vitalik actually used to exchange his articles for very nominal, at the time, nominal amounts of Bitcoin, very small amounts of Bitcoin, and trade them in for like t-shirts and stuff, because Bitcoin was hardly worth anything. But if only he had held it. But in finance, there's no woulda, coulda, shouldas, so not even gonna go there. So anyways, Vitalik was having a great time learning more about Bitcoin and blockchain and proof of work and how the entire system works and the cryptography about it and everything. But along the way, he kept having these ideas like, well, I think it would be a lot better if we had these additional features on it. Like, maybe instead of just having this master blockchain ledger that can record the transactions of a currency, of Bitcoin in this case, it would be kind of nice if this ledger could also record and document smart contracts. And then from there, you could build all kinds of decentralized applications off of this platform. And this immutable ledger system has so much more to offer than just being a ledger system for currency. That's pretty much where his thought process was coming from. In which case, he decided to write a white paper. So I have just like this plain white paper to showcase for white paper. But in real life, white papers, which are also linked in the timeline that's on the website. In real life, white papers, a good way to think of it for you not so tech and business savvy people is, it's a lot like a recipe. It's like reading a recipe for a cake. Like, it's like when you go on Pinterest and you see on Pinterest, like, oh, this is this awesome cake. Like, here's why you want to bake this cake, and here's the gist of how you bake this cake. And then you bake this cake. In which case, the cake white paper recipe was for Ethereum, the protocol. So that's fine and good. Vitalik releases this white paper onto the world in 2013. And then soon thereafter, he becomes friends with Gavin Wood. Here's Gavin. I tried to make their hair all kind of match a little bit in case you couldn't tell. So here's Gavin Wood and his fly hair. And yeah, so Gavin was like, wow, this is really cool. So he just, like the way Vitalik went after Bitcoin and thought it was really cool and then decided to make it better. That's how Gavin Wood saw Ethereum. He's like, wow, I see this white paper and it's really great. And I'm a technical computer geek too. I want to make an even more technical version of it in the form of a yellow paper. So in 2014, the two of them worked together, and Gavin Wood mainly is the one who authored the yellow paper. And a yellow paper is, okay, so if a white paper is like the general why you would want to bake the cake and how you bake the cake, the yellow paper is like the food chemistry of what goes into all the components and all the different reactions that are making that cake. And all the like very small constituent parts. Like the yellow paper is, in other words, a lot more technical than the white paper. But a lot of that is really helpful. Like if you go through the Ethereum yellow paper, which I believe is also linked in the link that I put on the bottom. If you go through the Ethereum yellow paper, you'll notice the fact that there's like a lot of math equations and stuff. So if you are a computer scientist, chances are you'll probably flourish if you can read the yellow paper. And between the white paper and the yellow paper, that really helps set the tone for open source development to start flowing into the Ethereum protocol. And along the way, like also in 2014, when the yellow paper was being written, is when Gavin Wood and Vitalik decided to make the Solidity programming language, which is a programming language that's more specific for smart contracts, for building and launching smart contracts, which is an important thing because it's a very unique thing at this point. It's not like it was a lot like just building a website or something. Like building on this protocol was, very different in nature. That was it. I'm going to try not to edit this because it just takes a long time. So just kick it with me while I drink tea. You should drink something too. Whatevs. Have fun. So anyways, that was 2014. You get the yellow paper with Gavin Wood. You get the Solidity programming language. And you also get Joe Lubin. So Joe Lubin comes into the scene. And he has a background, also a historical like computer nerd by trade, but also by trade, he spent some time helping program systems for a hedge fund. So he also has more of a business and investment background, and he's probably the most business savvy pony to come into this pony show at the time. And Joe Lubin, got some show notes too, so bear with me. Joe Lubin is the one that when he came into the scene in 2014 approximately, he's the one that helped found the Ethereum Foundation in order to have a business entity to start facilitate funding. And then shortly thereafter, the Ethereum Foundation was established in Switzerland. I think it's Zug, Switzerland is where they established it. But anyways, soon thereafter, they had the first Ether token sale, and I feel like Joe Lubin was probably a really big part of helping facilitate all of this. And also in 2014, Joe Lubin, on his own accord, kind of goes in a slightly different direction, like tangential direction, and he ends up starting an organization called Consensus. And Consensus is really big in the blockchain now, and the way I like to analogize Consensus, like make an analogy for Consensus, is it's a lot like a tech incubator, but for more Ethereum specific projects. So Consensus is constantly housing and funding and has, like grants and helps support a lot of projects that directly feed the Ethereum ecosystem. And I think that's a really big reason why the Ethereum ecosystem has grown genuinely exponentially larger than any of the other blockchain platforms that are designed to be built on. So yay for Joe Lubin. So you have this like perfecta trifecta over here of Gavin Wood helping with a lot more of the technical stuff, Joe Lubin helping with a lot of the business related stuff, and Vitalik kind of doing his best to go between both and be a figurehead for what he released on the world. So speaking of releasing things onto the world, let's move into 2015. We just went through 2013 with the white paper, 2014 with the yellow paper and Consensus and the Solidity programming language. Let's move into 2015. So in 2015, the Wild New Frontier launch gets sent out into the world, and that is the first iteration, first live launch of the Ethereum platform. And the main things to know about the Frontier launch of the software is three things. One, or two of which are very different than Bitcoin, and the reason there was an incentive to even do something different than Bitcoin in the first place. And the third is very akin to Bitcoin. The first is the fact that the Frontier Ethereum launch allows users to build decentralized applications. That's a really huge thing. The second thing is it allows you to write smart contracts, and these two kind of feed into each other a bit. And the third, which is like Bitcoin, is that it runs off of the proof of work consensus protocol. And a consensus protocol, very, very succinctly, is like a set of algorithms that help to synchronize the network, because it's a decentralized network by nature. There's a lot of different nodes helping run and support it, and the consensus algorithm, the consensus protocol, is what helps synchronize those nodes to validate the ledger, support the network, mine the, in this case, Ether that's in the network. For Bitcoin, it's obviously they're mining Bitcoin. Anyways, so Frontier release had those three components to it. And then let's see what else happened in 2015. Oh yeah, in 2015 they also had they launched the Dev Grants program to help incentivize more development on the Frontier release of the blockchain, and as a very prudent step, which is good if you're developing anything, especially that's open source, you want to vet it. And so they also started in 2015, alongside the Frontier release, they started a bug bounty program to try and find any flaws in the system, as well as had third-party auditors audit the code, audit the system to try and find any flaws in the system. And of course, like whenever you do this, a lot of flaws are going to be found, but you have to prioritize what you address. And put a drop pin on that thought, because it does become relevant, a lot more relevant in 2016 when we get there. So let's start out with 2016 in a good way, as I drink another sip of tea. Okay, so in 2016, March of 2016, the Homestead release, the second iteration of the Ethereum protocol, of the software, gets released. Because they obviously found bugs in Frontier and they prioritized it, and then they decided to do the second iteration with software improvements. See, this is what happens when I don't edit. I just have to edit myself on the spot. Okay, so March of 2016, Homestead release. And the way I like to visualize it is the way they named it. Like Frontier is like the wild new frontier, like no one's settled anything yet. But then the second software iteration is the Homestead version, where people are actually starting to colonize a little bit more and make it more of a homestead, not as much of a wild frontier, right? So the three main components of the Homestead release in 2016 is that obviously there were software improvements, because I mean, there's no point in updating and having a second iteration of something if you're not improving the software based on bugs you found. There was preparation for further upgrades, because they wanted to make sure that Homestead was going to get ready for later updates to the software that had much bigger implications to how Ethereum is structured. And then it also made way for some faster transactions. But relatively speaking, you still don't have the fastest, you still can't transact very quickly on the Ethereum blockchain. I think it's like an average of 15 per second naturally, which is why they're trying to make a lot of these improvements that will come later on and that are starting to be developed on layer 2 of the system. But if I get into that more, we're going to have a much longer video, and that'll be addressed in later segments of the Ethereum series anyways. So anyways, 2016, March, Homestead release comes out. Things are going pretty well in March, but then summer happens and you have, dun dun dun, the Dow cloud that descends on our little pony show. Let me see if I can get the ponies. So here's all our ponies. And then the Dow cloud happens, and the Dow stands for Decentralized Autonomous Organization. And what that is it's a lot like a company. It's structured similarly to a company, but it's decentralized. It's not backed by any certain government. It's not domiciled within any certain jurisdiction. It's decentralized. So you could have partners or people from all around the world that are funding and governing autonomously by themselves, governing this organization. And the Dow model is actually a really, really cool model. It's just, you know, this was one of the first ones that ever happened. And because of that, it was a giant vulnerability. Like, there were so many exploits that you could have because it hadn't been vetted yet in terms of the type of, because of what it was so far. So shortly after the Homestead release, this DAO, which had over $150 million worth of ETH in it, got hacked, and $50 million worth of ETH got drained from it. And that was money that was supposed to be funding a lot of and incentivizing a lot of upcoming development and projects on the Ethereum network. So that was really sad. The ponies were very much upset. and they were faced with what ended up being a fork. I promise this is like one of the last props I have, but yeah, hopefully you like it anyways. So anyways, the ponies were faced with a fork, and so that is, without getting too technical about it, it marks two different philosophies. The first of which ended up branching off and being what we now still know as the Ethereum blockchain. And that's the one that all of the Ethereum masterminds up until this point have followed and continue to develop on and continue to support. And that really goes to show something I've been saying over and over and over again, is like, technology is only as good as the people that are supporting it. I mean, we still live in a world where humans and our minds and our creativity and our ingenuity are still so incredibly important to whatever technology is being built. So that being said, the ponies followed the Ethereum blockchain, and then Ethereum Classic branched out. And the thing that kind of baffles me to this day on a little investment tangent is the fact that Ethereum Classic, even though it only has now 0 as of this last quarter when I was processing the Q1 2019 data, as of this last quarter, Ethereum Classic has 0 projects built on it, 0 applications built on it. It's not, I mean, it was even hacked within this last year, yet it's still in the top 25 market cap, probably by virtue of just holding on by a thread to the fact that it's the original Ethereum. So that goes to show you how powerful being one of the first movers can be. If even one of your bastard children offshot chains is still being able to be in the top 25 market cap, even though they're not intrinsically pulling much weight to justify it. I know that's kind of a harsh way of putting it, but that's kind of how I see it, to be honest. Okay, and then, but the Ethereum blockchain has over 1,000 projects built on it. I think it has over 1,100 projects built on it as of this last data poll that I did. And so it's doing really well. It's still flourishing, probably because it still has the people and the support behind it, which makes sense. But anyways, relevant to this video and the Dow hack, it marks two different philosophies. One philosophy of the ponies trying to return the $50 million worth of Ether to the investors who had it stolen, which is what they did. They went back and they amended the blockchain to where they could return the funds, and then they moved on from there. The second philosophy is the philosophy of the Ethereum Classic people who were like, no, one of the core pieces of value, points of value of a blockchain is the fact that it's an immutable, keyword immutable ledger system, and so you can't just go changing it just to return money. That was on them, that was their own risk for putting that type of money in the first place. I mean, just hearing me say this out loud, they're probably your more really diehard libertarian types, which I respect both camps, but what I respect even more is that if those diehard libertarians still wanted that philosophy to be successful, they probably should have put a lot more energy into developing Ethereum Classic more than they have. Anyways, and that's another good note on a very important side note. Something I've noticed a lot within this blockchain kind of new technology development that's happened is people have lost a lot of money because they've put it into technology that they haven't tested yet. Even if it's something as simple as a brand new user trying to transfer cryptocurrency and they haven't tested the wallet transfer with a small amount yet, then all of a sudden and so therefore they just send a large amount and then they lose a large amount because they don't know how the wallets work and how to actually properly transfer the funds. Same thing with the Dow. You have people, investors, that were brazen enough to put $150 million worth of Ether in an organization that they didn't even understand how it worked yet or whether or not it was safe. So yeah, just be careful. And I know of another project where, they built a contract, put over $1 million in it before they even really tested what would happen if they only sent a couple dollars, and over $1 million vanished. Just test with small amounts. There's not a huge cost to doing that, so you may as well. Security note. Let's move back to the timeline. So in 2016, the hack happened, the fork happened because of it, and then the ponies had to go with their tails between their legs to the Shanghai DevCon shortly thereafter that summer and answer for themselves and the hack that happened, because now it's just kind of bad publicity for the blockchain. Okay. Let's move into 2017. So in March, no, that was March of 2016, in October of 2017, so more recently, you have the Metropolis release, the first of 2 Metropolis releases that come out into the Ethereum ecosystem. The first, obviously the first version was the Frontier, Wild New Frontier, then Homestead. They're starting to rein it in a little more, make more stable developments out of this. And then the Metropolis release, so you take this little Homestead and you try and, what's the right word? Metropolize it, obviously, but you try and industrialize it in a way. You just make it a lot more robust in terms of what's going on. And the Metropolis releases, both Byzantium and Constantinople, have 4 main components to them. One is that it's designed, you know, the Metropolis releases are designed to help scale the network more, because this network, you know, it does pretty well on a small scale, but when you try to add a bunch of crypto kitties into it, it doesn't run so hot. Also, there's more emphasis on privacy. That's the second thing. The third, increased emphasis on security. And the fourth is a transition to proof of stake. That's the big one. That's, you know, proof of work was that consensus algorithm, that synchronization mechanism that was running the system for a long time, similar to Bitcoin. But Ethereum, for a lot of reasons we'll get into later, wants to transition to proof of stake. So that's like the biggest one. And that's where we mention Mr. Vlad Zamfir over here. He's the one that helps, has been very instrumental in the transition to proof of stake and building the technology that's going to go into that, specifically called Casper. And yeah, so good job, Vlad. So now we have 4 ponies going on. Okay, so in October of 2017 is when Metropolis Byzantium was released. So again, you want to scale the network, increase privacy, increase security, transition to proof of stake. And then that had them pretty busy for a while in terms of getting that released and vetted. And then in 2018, the only thing worth mentioning, I think in 2018, actually reminds me of this Andrew Carnegie quote, where the gist of it is that it takes a lot of intelligence to build wealth, but it takes even more mindfulness and intelligence to spend it wisely. And that's why I wanted to make a little kind of like heart space note for 2018, because Vitalik donated, I think, over $3 million to help fund projects for supporting African refugees, as well as some biotechnology projects. So good job there in terms of, you know, I know it takes a lot of intelligence to help build Ethereum, but the fact that you're also mindfully sending that energy back out into the world in good ways is awesome, magical, you know. And then let's move into 2019. So in 2019, finally in March, it was due in February, but it actually, it was due in January. The second release of Metropolis, the Constantinople release of Metropolis, was due in January, but they found some issues, some bugs with it, so they decided to play it safe, not have another kind of like Dow snafu happen, and they released the technology they released the iteration of Ethereum Constantinople the last day of February in 2019. So that's now live, which is cool. And then it also was accompanied by updates called St. Petersburg. There's these things called EIPs, Ethereum Improvement Protocols, Ethereum Improvement Proposals, something like that, that, you know, all of the different developers, because this is open source, so all of the different developers that go in and make proposals on how to update the network in a better way and improve the network in a better way, those are designated with EIP numbers, and the ones that the core development team decides to implement and adopt are the EIPs that go into the updates that happen, in this case the Constantinople and St. Petersburg upgrade. So what's beyond 2019? And the main thing, 2 main things. One is continue to try and scale the network. Like, they want to be a lot more competitive with companies like Visa that can process so many more transactions per second than Ethereum can even come close to at this point. And the second thing is the transition to proof of stake. And they're going to do that with a project that they're working on called Serenity. So it went from Frontier to Homestead to Metropolis to Serenity. And Serenity is denoted by this beacon chain that they're calling it. And the beacon chain is the one that's going to be officially only running on proof of stake as a consensus mechanism instead of proof of work. So that's where Ethereum's been, that's where Ethereum's headed. If you watched this video or watched anything else or read anything else and are inspired to help out with Ethereum, then by all means check out their GitHub, which is also featured in some of the links on the website that I'll give you guys. And it's kind of like the modern day of like support our troops. Like the old school version is like, hey, support our troops. I feel like, hey, support our open source developers, because these are the people that are using their free time to develop on projects that they feel passionate about. And I think there's something really cool about that. So if you are an open source developer doing what you love, more power to you. And if you want to do it on Ethereum, go for it, because this ecosystem is a pretty cool one. And then if you're also into development and you want to learn more about the technical components and you're more of a social person and you don't just want to be on GitHub pushing, submitting code all day, they have DevCons every year since 2014. Ethereum has had developers conferences. The first one was in 2014 in Berlin, DevCon 0. DevCon 1 was in 2015 in London. DevCon 2 was in 2016 in Shanghai when they had to talk about the Dow. And then DevCon 3 was in Cancun, my favorite place in the whole wide world. And DevCon 4 was in Prague last year. DevCon 5, I'm not sure where that's going to be, but they have this other developers conference happening like right around now, I believe, in Australia, which I think they should call it, like for marketing, I think they should call it the Great Barrier ETH, because it's like the Great Barrier Reef and Ethereum combined. I just think that would be hilarious. But anyways, bottom line is there are so many ways for you to get involved in the Ethereum ecosystem if it's something you're interested in. And stay tuned, because I am going to keep making videos on many other components of Ethereum. I'll try to make them fun and more exciting than just reading content on a website. So thanks for joining in this magical world, and yeah, salutations. See you next time.